AI isn't going to do that. AI is not going to do that. You need community for that. When you use AI, you are offloading your ability to grow in a particular skill onto a machine that is doing the work for you. And so that is the equivalent of going to a gym and then handing $5 to somebody else to do the weightlifting for you and expecting to get stronger.
When our post-everything world has turned life upside down, how do you even know which end is up?
If you're committed to a community or a cause greater than yourself, you don't have the luxury of checking out or the freedom to burn out.
It's not enough to just keep surviving. We need to thrive again.
This is Post Everything,
a podcast about remapping culture and rethinking leadership in a liminal age.
On today's episode of Post Everything, Brad and I are talking with Alan Noble, Associate Professor of English at Oklahoma Baptist University. Now, Alan has written some incredible books that we've talked about on the show before. One is called Disruptive Witness. Another one is called You Are Not Your Own, Belonging to God in an Inhuman World. And he has a third called On Getting Out of Bed. But Alan has a new book coming out in April of 2026 called To Live Well, Practical Wisdom for Moving Through Chaotic Times. And in To Live Well, Alan shows how you can not only endure, but actually flourish in life as he explores virtues, the virtues of prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance, faith, hope, and love. And today we talk with Alan about artificial intelligence and how it's interacting with the classroom in higher education, and then how we're called to a life of virtue in the midst of these chaotic times. So we hope you enjoyed this episode with Alan. Brad and I are here with Alan Noble, author of To Live Well, Practical Wisdom for Moving Through Chaotic Times. Alan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Outstanding. Hey, Alan, we wanted to talk today about AI and higher education. And before we jump into AI, I want to kind of set the stage a little bit with maybe a bit of a state of the union for higher ed. And there have been some fascinating articles and podcasts, and there's been some waves being made in the news around some studies that illustrate that maybe higher ed isn't in its best place, historically speaking, in general. But one thing that really kind of tied it together with the implications for AI was this episode from the Verge's Decoder podcast. And the episode is titled, How AI is Fueling an Existential Crisis in Education. And very early on in the episode, they play a soundbite from an instructional designer who says, if this technology becomes more ubiquitous, we'll have courses created by AI, graded by AI, with submissions from students absolutely generated by AI. So it begs the question, what are we even doing here in higher ed, right?
Yeah.
And so, but honestly, I think even without AI forcing that question, I think there have been several recent studies that seem to illustrate that we are long overdue for to use another technological term, but one very dated for those who grew up in the 80s and 90s. We've been overdue for a defrag of nearly all public education, never mind higher education.
Yeah.
There's a recent UC San Diego study that showed that 1 in 8 incoming freshmen can't do high school algebra. Yeah. And that's a 30 times the number between 2020 and 2025. And something that they make a point of saying is that the pandemic just accelerated a decline that's actually been started in the early 2010s, but that's not unique to the to the pandemic effects of disembodying education for a while. There's also, grade inflation is a new term that I've learned. Harvard is linking prestige to student satisfaction rather than student achievement, and the implications of that is they're giving away a whole lot more A's, but there's a whole lot less meaning attached to that grade now. None of this actually even gets at how objectively bad screens are for learning, and there's the reality that it's inferior to handwriting for memory and retention. in almost every measurable way. And that's still like, we're just talking about the formative and educational problems and difficulties in higher ed. We're not even talking about like financial incentives or how a whole lot of larger universities seem to exist to fund a sports program. So just kind of very open-ended starting question. Do you agree or disagree that we need we've been long overdue for a defrag? And maybe just riff a bit on, like, what would you say the state of the union is in higher ed before we even start getting into anything specific to AI?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. You're right. It's a mess. There's a lot of schools that have been running on momentum and money. They've been running on what keeps the doors open and what will keep students in the seats, rather than asking the philosophical question, what are we even doing here? What is the purpose of our of our institution? And we have accrediting bodies that are supposed to require us to ask that question: what is the purpose of your institution, and how are you fulfilling that purpose? But these accrediting bodies, there are always ways around these accrediting bodies and around asking and fulfilling those questions. And so you can just do these, you can do these things, answer those questions in this formal way without really digging down and doing some soul searching. And so I think a lot of large universities just exist for the sake of existing, exist because there's momentum. There's momentum. You've always existed, or it seems like you've always existed, and so you just keep going. You've got, as you said, these sports programs. You've got these business programs. You've got these, nursing programs, and so you just keep going. But especially now with rising cost and tuition, with inflation, with AI making it seem like there's no purpose in education. We do need to have some soul searching and ask, what is the purpose of education? So I teach a freshman class, freshman composition. So I get, right off, straight from the dorm room. And the first paper that I assign my students asks them to question, what is the purpose of college? What is the good that they are pursuing in college, and what is the good life that they are pursuing, and how does college help them pursue that good? Because my assumption is that they haven't thought that through, and that they need to think that through. And I tell them that they need to think that through. And I don't think a lot of professors and I don't think a lot of administrators have thought that through for themselves, because it's a career path. And now I do think that this is an advantage for smaller Christian schools. I know my own school has been very thoughtful about, okay, what is it that we are doing? We are helping to do holistic formation of young people for the glory of God, and that's part of our mission, right? And so we've been very intentional about figuring out, okay, how do we do that? But a lot of schools haven't made that bandwidth, created the bandwidth to think through those things.
Yeah, that's kind of the issue. Is it's interesting that you said that your school has actually intentionally leaned into asking those questions, and you've landed on holistic formation for young people for the glory of God. But as higher education has already been free falling in public perception for other reasons, whether people believe rightly so or not, that it's been co-opted by liberal politics or progressive politics, whatever reason, or you're going to end up with college debt. I guess another perception is that higher ed is going to be replaced in one way or another by AI. So maybe even take that holistic formation for young people for the glory of God. And if we asked a broader question, what do you think we should be doing in higher ed across the country or across the globe if Alan Noble was in charge? or what should higher ed be about And how do we get there? Whether
Yeah.
we think whether we think God's a reference point or not, which we happen to believe He is. But
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah. So if I take, if I take God out of the equation, if I'm just thinking higher education in general, I do think it needs to be about holistic formation, because those, that 18 to 22, those are pivotal years, and young people need not only knowledge and skills, but they also need mentorship and formation in character and virtue. And AI isn't going to do that. AI is not going to do that. You need community for that. And so that's why even online education is, in my opinion, less than, it can be a second best, the theory of second best, it can be a second best for people in certain circumstances, but it's not as good as, embodied education, and in community, living in community. And so I think that holistic education, and I think it's increasingly important to have this kind of holistic education that trains students in a liberal arts way, which would include a study of not just a particular major, but a study of history and psychology and literature and political science and all these sorts of things, because we are a people that tends to be ahistorical and myopic in our thinking, and illiterate, and I think we see the results of that all around us. Right? We're not thinking carefully. We're not making critical arguments. We're not making careful arguments. We're not dialoguing well. We're not able to process information by ourselves. Instead, we're offloading that information to AI and asking AI or Google to do that sort of processing for us. We're not able to be virtuous citizens because we don't understand history. We don't understand history well. And so I think higher education prepares one to be a virtuous citizen. Now, do I think it's necessary? I think what I would like to say is this. What I would like to say is that our public education system is sufficient that you can graduate high school and be a virtuous citizen. But I would say that the reality is that our public education system is so uneven that the reality is that most people need some more years of education in order to fill their gaps in writing, in critical thinking, in history, in math, in science, in order to be well-rounded and prepared and skilled in order to be a virtuous citizen. That's it. In my opinion, that's the case.
That really, you're helping flesh out part of what I think is so shocking about some of these studies and the reports that are coming out, is because I think we're used to expecting that unevenness to happen along economic lines, because that's been the whole Child Left Behind Act of the early 2000s, and just there's so many different efforts that we are always making to try and correct that. But what is strange and feels really surprising is how it's not economic lines that seems to be happening. It's often around ideological lines now, and it's often higher economic school districts. At least, like I'm in Boulder County, it's like they're shutting down an entire high school in the city of Boulder because they've hemorrhaged families from the public school district, and that's shocking. To me, and the families are leaving. I don't have data for this, but I suspect they are probably wealthier and are able to opt out and have the financial means to do so. And so that's shocking to me. And I'm just wondering, like, do you see that as well? Is that a
that's interesting.
Is that a connection you see?
I don't know. Yeah, I've not seen that myself, but that's an interesting observation. Yeah, I don't have any data points on that.
Well, let's dive into like the AI, the specific AI implications for lack of a better term, the institution of higher education, right? So in preparation for our conversation, I texted a couple members of the table who are also faculty members at a state university in the area, major university, and asked them like, "Hey, what would you want to ask Alan Noble about this topic?" And they were very excited, and I had many questions from them. Some of which I was surprised, but we're only going to hit a couple. Don't worry. One of them I thought was interesting. To what degree, and this gets at your formation piece, right? To what degree can we reasonably expect anyone, let alone students with still developing brains, to possess the self-discipline to wisely regulate their use of a tool that immediately makes them feel smarter, even when most of us know at some level that it's doing the opposite? And perhaps the role of community plays here, as you said. Does it work better for a group of students or creative people to transparently use AI in full view of one another so that they're forced to reckon with their inflation of self-image? How do we navigate this?
Yeah, so this is what I have done, and I'm still in the process of figuring out how successful that is and how it's going to work in the future. But I'll tell you what I'm doing and what I think is the best model right now. And that is making the argument to students that the plain virtuous principled argument to students, which is the truth, that when you use AI, you are offloading your ability to grow in a particular skill onto a machine that is doing the work for you. And so that is the equivalent of going to a gym and then handing $5 to somebody else to do the weightlifting for you and expecting to get stronger.
Wow.
And you will never get stronger. And you will, because you are paying to be in the classroom, so you're paying somebody, and so you're paying. You will never get stronger, and you will be poorer because of it. And there's no growth in wisdom. There's no growth in critical thinking. And so what I try to explain to them in my class, which is writing and communications class, a composition class, is that the process of writing is also the process of thinking. It's also the process of speaking. It's involved in all of these core skills that are going to be useful for all the other classes that they're going to be in. And so to offload that work, and in my opinion, writing classes are one of the most, aside from maybe programming classes, writing classes or writing assignments are some of the most vulnerable for AI. It's like, oh yeah, this is perfect. This is great. This is what AI does. It writes. And so I try to explain to them, this is what you were doing. This is the proposition. This is what's happening. And I will say that I'm excited when I get a paper full of errors, because it tells me, it communicates to me, this is a student who is wrestling, who's lifting the weights themselves. And I know that they have chosen the harder path. And maybe, and that's virtuous, and that's good. Yeah. That's the struggle. Is it the case that some of them are going to use AI and slip through the cracks, and I'm not going to catch them? And is that possible? That's possible. That's a possibility. And unfortunately, AI detection is not 100%. And I can't catch everybody. And so that's a possibility, right? And so, part of your question was, how can we expect students not to, give in to this temptation? Well, my opinion is we appeal to principle. We make a virtuous appeal. We lay out the virtuous case for them, and we invite them into living virtuous lives. We make the case for them. Now, some of them are not in college because they want to be in college. Some of them are not in college because they want to learn. Some of them are not virtuous people and don't care. But listen, even those students, if you make the appeal, maybe they will change. Maybe they will become virtuous. Like if you don't offer them, if you don't invite them to become virtuous, when are they going to become virtuous?
Right.
Right? So shouldn't we make that appeal? It seems to me that we ought to. Now, might they decline that appeal and choose to be vicious and choose to self-sabotage, which is essentially what that is doing, negating, offloading that work?
No college student has ever done self-sabotage. That's not a thing. Right.
They've always done this, right? Yeah, that's possible. But I think we make the appeal and then we live with the consequences. That's what I think we ought to do.
I want to ask a follow-up question on how virtue and the line of ethics and even how you teach that. I can see some arrogant 18-year-olds say, well, Mr. Noble, Professor Noble, so you're saying we should never, ever use AI for your class? Is it all or nothing? And to not use it is virtuous and to use it is lacks virtue. How do you help them navigate that line, or how do you even think about that line yourself?
Yeah, so I teach them that the way we use AI, where it's acceptable in my class, is the creation of citations. I say, if you want to create a citation for your works cited page, that's busy work. That is perfectly appropriate, but you are still responsible for whether it's accurate. So you still have to go through and check for accuracy. That's still appropriate. And in fact, a lot of databases automatically generate works cited entries anyway. A lot of academic databases automatically generate. So it's not cheating if you use a works cited generator. I don't see that as cheating. I think it's perfectly appropriate, but you are responsible for the end result. You are going to receive my grade based on what I see on the page. So that is appropriate. But if you're doing brainstorming, guess what? Brainstorming is a great mental exercise. That's the kind of work that employers want you to do. I want you to do that brainstorming. If you're brainstorming with AI, I don't want you doing that. And you're going to be tempted to, but I really want you to be doing the brainstorming. That's a good mental exercise. Outlining is part of writing. Outlining involves you organizing paragraphs into arguments. That's a part of the writing process. I want you to be doing that mental work. All the steps in the writing process are parts of learning how to write effectively. I want you to be doing that work. So if you want to make a works cited page, that's fine. But everything else, that's up to you.
Man, I remember hearing an author say, and this was really helpful and validating for me. He said, some authors write books to explain what they think, and other authors write books to figure out what they think. And that process of writing and brainstorming and outlining and crafting, I can't even, I needed that framing to help explain to our people in at the table. I needed to write this book, The Reason for Church, because I need to figure out what I think and how I think about this so that it can be a gift to this church, just because I need to go through that formative process. And that alone, that's actually the most valuable part of this that you can't really quantify. There are no royalties for when that actually happens and succeeds. And there are not really any royalties anyway, but that's a different topic. But I'm also so empathetic to that temptation, because the tyranny of the blank page is real.
Yes.
But I think I'm even more afraid of what happens if I'm not forced to do that anymore. And that's part of what keeps me, honestly, makes it kind of easy not to fall to that temptation so far. Hopefully I'm saying this publicly and it's being recorded so I can be held accountable to that. But at least where I'm at right now, it feels too very Gandalf with the One Ring saying, no, I cannot take that. I can't even pick that up. That's not mine to carry. I would not handle that well.
Yeah.
Man, I I'm also curious, like you're answering a couple of the questions that I got too, but one that the one that both of them asked, which makes a whole lot of sense as professors and teachers. How might AI put pressure on professors or introduce some perverse incentives around like how you do your job? And from what you're describing in terms of your experience, it sounds like you have a whole lot of support institutionally to hold the line and to not, you're probably not feeling a whole lot of pressure to compromise on that. But what about when we're talking about public universities where the almighty dollar and having as many kids go through so that they are getting an education and paying tuition, and just the just sheer economic inflation creating this pressure? I mean, there's not a company or a startup right now that will survive if they are not actively using AI. And I on the one hand, embracing AI as a university on an institutional level is going to accelerate a decline, but I don't know that a whole lot of universities feel like they have an option not to either. Can you just talk about that, and like how in the world can a professor resist those incentives if there isn't that institutional support because of the state of higher ed we've been talking about?
Yeah, so it's you can only do what you can do, right? If you don't have institutional support, if you don't have the support of your chair and your administrators, you can only do so much. But I would say resisting the encroachment of AI in your grading and in your classroom as much as possible is important, because for a number of reasons. One, for the reasons I just gave, for the pedagogical reasons, I just it's not teaching students. They're not ready for this. One argument is that students need to learn how to use AI. I understand that, but particularly for freshmen and sophomores, they need to learn how to think and how to process and how to write. They can learn these tools are created to be easily adapted and adopted. They will be able to pick up those tools easily. They will not be able to easily learn how to write and how to think. Those things take time and processes. So we need to teach them those things. And I will say that you can lose the ability to learn to write if you're overusing AI. So that's a potential danger. So we need to be teaching them those basics.
Yeah.
But the other concern I have, aside from the pedagogical, is the more we allow AI to encroach, the more we are in higher education, the more we are inviting our own demise. Because, you gave that, you mentioned in that one article from The Verge, I think, from that podcast, that audio clip, that sort of doomsday scenario where, it's being taught by AI, it's being graded by AI, it's being, produced by AI, the content is being produced, the students are AI. Well, one scenario that I think is not unlikely is that a university starts producing, in addition to online education, courses that are taught by AI bots, individualized. And I've heard an expert talk about this. So you have an individualized, just like you have AI chatbots and companion bots right now. Well, let's say you have an AI tutor that's personalized to you and will teach you a course, right? U.S. History 101, designed to and trained at your pace. And so you can learn the course at your pace. So it's no longer 6 weeks or 15 weeks. It's actually at your pace. And it grades your work. It teaches you the content. It creates, you can engage with it. This sounds pretty appealing, right? Well, now we have professors out of work. And also and then also all the pedagogical problems, right? And all of this, right? And so it will initially be sold as a cost-cutting, measure, right, and a revenue-generating thing. And we'll be told, actually, we're not going to get rid of faculty. We're just adding value to the university. But then eventually, we're going to let go of faculty, and then you're going to have universities that are entirely just, tuition or tutorial bots, And then we have to ask, what are we even doing with higher education, which is what you started this podcast with, right? Well, what's even the point, right? What is even the point?
I mean, you just gave like the perfect lead into something I've been wrestling with, and I'm at least a lowercase d doomer, right, on the topic of AI, right? And but the scenario that you just laid out, one, illustrates a controlling vision for education that is really not much, if anything, more than just information download. And I'm not sure that's part of the problem, and why the institution of higher education is vulnerable right now, is because that's what we've been teaching people education is, right? But the second thing is, like, is as pessimistic as I am, I'm wondering if it's actually even possible for that scenario to play out in that way, because we are not even aware of the benefits of in-person instruction and embodied teaching and learning in an embodied environment in ways that we are going to lose if we try and do what you described. And we're going to feel that, right? Because I'm wondering, like, I've been trying to think through a taxonomy of, like, okay, if information is just mere data, it's disembodied from context and experience, then knowledge is like embodied information. But then there's wisdom, which is experiential information and knowledge that translates to learning. And you really can't get past. So, like, how effective is an AI going to be as a tutor or a professor if we can't get past information by its very nature? Because it has no way to learn from experience. It's at least an entire concentric circle away from it, because it's not a bodied human being. Like, I guess my question is, like, am I crazy to be thinking that way? Are we able to just continue, like, delude ourselves into thinking that is possible, and so it could still happen? Or is this like a kind of built-in guardrail, like functional real-world guardrail that AI is going to bump up against, and maybe we don't have to be as afraid of it?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So if I had to predict, I would say that for some people, the lower cost of going with a sort of tutorial bot university will be appealing, right? Because you can lower the cost dramatically. And just like an online university is appealing to some people. But for other people, they'll want that traditional college experience and, the possibility of meeting a spouse, the possibility of, of sports, the sports experience, the dorm experience. Those things will still be valuable. I know for me, speaking about, the knowledge and wisdom aspect of it, I believe that what I offer my students is that when I'm teaching a literature class, I'm teaching them to love what is lovely, and a bot can't do that. A bot can't be infectious about, or maybe it can be infectious, but a bot can't be with a bug, but it can't infect them with the love of literature the way a human can. And I can help my students. I just finished teaching the 4 quartets, and I can teach the students how to love this great, difficult work of poetry in a way that is infectious, that inspires them to love what is lovely. And that's something that a bot's not going to be able to replicate. So so that's a value that is different. The question is, how pragmatic are people going to be? And my suspicion is there's going to be a group of colleges that offer a traditional embodied experience, and for some people that's going to be a premium that they're willing to pay for, and that for some other people they're going to say, gosh, this cheaper route is a whole, that's all I'm looking for, and that's going to be appealing to them. And we'll have further separation of what we're looking at in our society.
Man, I was going to say I love that until your last sentence.
Yeah.
But I feel like we've got our work cut out for us on this, because like what you're describing with like teaching somebody to love and that becoming infectious, like that is the kind of the epistemological dimension of this, and the meaning making part of what it means to be a human being that I think we've neglected for so long. And there are a whole lot of people in the world who are not like, we haven't even begun to wrestle with that dimension, because like, let me give you an example. I heard Joe Rogan, theologian extraordinaire.
Yeah.
He was talking about AI in an interview recently, and he said something that stuck out to me, because this is an illustration of what you just said. He said, I don't think there will be any respectability to the name Harvard when you've got a digital god. It won't mean anything that you graduated from Yale. You're going to get a very different way that human beings interact with information. I don't think there's going to be any gatekeepers of information anymore. And then a few minutes later, he said, I think those institutions have done themselves in, and they've served a great function for a long time, but I think they're not necessary anymore.
Yeah.
And that separation, like, I think you're just right. Like, I think this is going to be a catalyst for winnowing around, like, what is your functional anthropology?
Yeah.
Are we just like meat bags with brains?
Right.
Or is there a some kind of a moral and existential dimension that you can't quantify in this? And it's going to be, oh man, you want to talk about a post-Christian society? That's what we're talking about here. And I'm just curious, like how are you wrestling? Like how are you preparing students to be thinking about that?
Well, I suppose what I'm trying to do is emphasize embodiment, right? I mean, that's what we need, is embodiment, is people who are willing to take people out for coffee, who are willing to embrace the fact that they have bodies and can love their neighbor in practical, local ways. That's, I think, the important thing. And so we try to create a good community, a healthy community, an embodied community, not just an online community at our university. And that's part of what I think our goal is to be embodied.
Mm. Wow.
Alan, your new book that's coming out in April has kind of been running in the background of this interview, but we actually haven't addressed it directly yet.
Yeah.
To Live Well, Practical Wisdom for Moving Through Chaotic Times comes out in April from IVP. And the framework for your book is exploring 7 traditional virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance, faith, hope, and love. And one thing that's struck me as I've been in conversations with people, particularly young people, young adults, is that there's this growing desire to live a life of virtue. It's almost as if they're coming to this conclusion just by operating in the world as it is. They sort of come to this, even if they don't use the word virtue, they get there. Now, I see more and more people wanting to choose a path for life that has some sort of moral grid to it, almost in a way that was surprising to me. Like, as I've talked with people who aren't believers, I find that I see more and more people who aren't Christians actually like rejecting licentious, lustful living. And that's it kind of threw me for a loop, you know? And maybe there's some Jordan Peterson in the background there, or Jocko Willink, some other influencers who kind of say, choose your path. But what do you make of this movement towards virtuous living? What's going on and why now?
Yeah, so I think we can handle chaos only so long. We can handle disorder only so long. And then we need order. Right now, we've been living in a time where there's moral uncertainty. The philosopher Zygmunt Bauman calls liquid modernity, where there's just this constant shifting under our feet. One day a word is unacceptable to say in public. The next, everybody's saying it in public, even the president, and it's apparently morally acceptable to say, at least in certain quarters. And then, but 2 weeks from now, it's probably going to be unacceptable again. You have no certainty about what is acceptable and what is unacceptable anymore, right? You can't live in a society like that where there are no moral norms for long. You need to have anchors. It leaves you anxious. It leaves you unsettled. It leaves you disturbed. And that's the kind of world that I describe in You Are Not Your Own, my second book. And when I went around the country giving talks about You Are Not Your Own, a lot of people found it very helpful, but they asked me, what am I supposed to do about it? And which is a perfectly legitimate question, which I don't really answer in the book, except I say, you belong to God, which is a good answer, but it doesn't answer it on a granular level. Like, what am I supposed to do tomorrow? What am I supposed to do with my phone? What am I supposed to do with my children? What am I supposed to do with the fact that, I have a job? And so this book, To Live Well, answers it, tries to address it on a granular level. What am I supposed to do day to day? And so that's what I think is driving a lot of these questions. We've lived too long with uncertainty, and we need to be anchored. And so the virtues offer us an anchor in who we were created to be, in our telos in Christ, and the virtues are pointing us toward that telos, and that's the essence of the book.
I went and looked at an article you wrote in October called What My Next Book Is All About. I think it was actually October of 24, not most recent October. And you're processing kind of publicly how you're wrestling with this idea of virtues. And you mentioned two challenges that I thought were right on. Two challenges you identified in writing about the virtues. One was balancing the personal responsibility to choose to act virtually with both the communal practices of virtues and the work of the Holy Spirit, so that the book is not a works-based righteousness manual. But then secondly, you said to overcome the Protestant unfamiliarity or even a skepticism allergy towards virtue, because maybe there is a sense that virtues are legalistic. We know the fruit of the Spirit, but we don't know virtues. So we have this kind of strange moment, in my opinion, where we may have a moment when people who are not Christians are drawn to virtues, and Christians are actually less familiar with virtues, which seems backwards. I mean, I went and just read through 1 Corinthians 13, which is it's a commendation of the virtue of love. And even Paul in Philippians 4:8 talks about pursuing moral excellence as a virtue. So why does that tension exist, and how could Christians reframe virtues in a way that would help them embody them and live well themselves, and compellingly invite those who don't know Christ to live well?
Yeah, so this is a particular challenge for those in the Protestant tradition, the Reformed tradition, even though it shouldn't be. Calvin in his Institutes says, look, the virtues are important. The church fathers talked about them. You should read them. People should write about the virtues, but they fell by the wayside, and the Catholics have just sort of ran the course and owned the conversation on virtues, unfortunately. And it's great for them, but unfortunately, those of us in the Reformed tradition and Protestants in general, just haven't talked a whole lot about virtues, and we should, because virtues are very valuable, and they're part of our story. They're part of the church's story, and they're important. And so part of this book is reclaiming the value of virtues, working with Aristotle and working with Aquinas, and working with Joseph Pieper, who is a Catholic philosopher, an important Catholic philosopher, and working with them. And there are places where I have to distance myself from his understanding of Catholic understandings of hope, for example. But to answer your question, yeah, I think we need to reclaim these tools, reclaim this language, because it is part of the biblical tradition. The Bible talks about courage. The Bible talks about temperance. The Bible talks about justice. It has a lot to say about justice. It has a lot to say about prudence. It certainly has a lot to say about faith, hope, and love. So these are biblical concepts that we need to use and apply. And in the book, I pull and use Jesus as a model for each of these virtues to help us understand that these are biblical concepts that we need to apply in our own lives to live toward our own Christ-likeness, while understanding that we are also living under grace. And so that was the other tension that you mentioned, that we don't do these things in order to win God's favor, but because we are justified before God, we do these things to live because we have the freedom to. And so I'm walking a tightrope here, but I think I managed to do it.
Man, that reminds me of I think it's Dallas Willard who said, "Grace is not opposed to effort, but to earning." Right? Like, and I just, man, yeah, our church just did a sermon series on the Sermon on the Mount, and we spent the entire fall in the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes, and I was really taken aback by the response that we got from people, which was a mixture of like, I'm really uncomfortable, which is good. That was expected. But what I was surprised to hear was a whole lot of relief, like clarity. Like, it's okay to strive for these things as a response to the gospel. It's like, yes, that help me understand why that feels new for you. And, and I think that is a symptom of this reality that you're describing, that tension that we live in, that like actually maybe we've done a real disservice by explaining grace in such a way that means like, yes, rest, good, freedom, good, but obedience is also good.
Yes.
And it's also actually necessary for us to grow into Christ-likeness and reach any kind of biblical trajectory of maturity.
Yes.
So,
yeah, and that's one of the things that I'm excited about. And when I work with young people, there's going back to John's earlier question about, what is it about the virtues that seems to resonate with people today? I find that there's a hunger for an explanation for how to be excellent. There's young people, they want to know, okay, how can I be ambitious without being egotistical? How can I be ambitious without being egotistical?
Ambition.
Right. And so in the book, I talk about this in terms of magnanimity and the virtue of magnanimity, and a way of living into our createdness in God, living into the excellence that we were created to walk in, and that's how I talk about it, and as that is not being a negative thing, but as a virtuous thing to do, as we ought to do. We ought to strive for excellence for God's glory. That's not a negative thing to do. That's a virtuous thing to do. But I think a lot of young people, they want to hear, okay, what does that look like? But they need to be told that, and that needs to be framed in terms of grace, in terms of a response to the gospel, not as seeking after the gospel.
Yeah. Alan, that's really good. And we have appreciated all of your books, and we're really looking forward to this one that comes out in April, To Live Well, Practical Wisdom for Moving Through Chaotic Times. Even as you're talking about it, I really want to recommend this to the young adults in our church. And so I'm looking forward to it coming out, and I want to thank you for coming on Post Everything.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's been a wonderful time.
Awesome. Thanks so much, man.
Brad, I can't believe it's taken us 6 seasons to get Alan Noble on. We should have had him on way earlier in the history of this podcast, but we got him.
You shouldn't have admitted that. That's kind of embarrassing, honestly.
Well, what was your takeaway? What was your so what from our time with Alan?
I mean, as usual, all of it was good. And I think what I'm still trying to get some handholds around, but I think is just really helpful, is the kind of every different piece of the conversation that we had was looking at the same thing from a handful of different perspectives or different dimensions or facets of the same thing. And I think it's this reality that AI will, or actually probably is already, forcing us to ask and then retrieve and then live according to a Christian anthropology. Right. So, like, what is a human being from a Christian perspective? What are flourishing means and flourishing ends? A telos of the Christian life. Like, what are we even made for? Because there is something about artificial intelligence and the supposed promise and peril of AI that I think is really unique and distinct to humanity. Like that we are rational beings. But also that what we use that reason for, right? Like what I mean by that is, every other, any animal, outside of humanity is asking, like, what's good for me? Human beings, we are moral creatures. And there's a sense that we're not only asking, no matter what culture you're in, even if you're not a Christian, you're still asking the question of what is actually good in an ultimate sense. Like, what is good, not even just also for other, like a community or human beings, not just me individually, but just like across the board, what is objectively good? That question alone is something that it's just like really important. When humanity loses the ability to ask that question or stops asking that question for some reason, things go off the rails. It goes really poorly. Wars happen, right? And what AI is, I feel like, is doing is it's exposing the places where we have not been asking that question, and it's forcing us to either change, for example, in higher ed, what is the means and the ends of higher education, and actually defining that instead of just existing for its own sake. I thought Alan's point on that was really spot on.
That was really helpful,
right? And it reminded me of. Like I was telling him this after we hit stop, but when writing my book, the chapter on the church as a spiritual greenhouse, the original subtitle of that was something along the lines of, how the church helps us to cultivate wisdom, virtue, and maturity. And I think I was 6,000 or 7,000 words into that chapter before I realized, like, I actually can't do all those things in one chapter. These need a book, and I think it settled for how the church helps us cultivate faith, and that kind of as a synonym for maturity in a lot of ways. But it killed me to not talk about virtue, because that's a massive missing component in our understanding of why we need church. And I think he's really getting at that when he's looking at the the trade-offs for AI being we lose by using AI to make life easier. We are missing out on the way that meaning can be made during suffering, in the midst of suffering, and the virtue that's cultivated based on how we respond to that suffering. Like right within a spiritual greenhouse, suffering is co-opted by Christ to be pruning so that we can bear more fruit. Like that's part of what Jesus is talking about when he says he's the true vine. And it's the more fruitful branches that he promises to vine, not the less fruitful branches, promises to prune, not the less fruitful branches, right? And so part of, just to be thinking in a purely principle way and not getting too concrete or application oriented, right? The trade-off and the peril of AI is we get a counterfeit or a mere facsimile of formation without having to go through the process of wrestling with what is ultimately good in a transcendent way. And I think that's part of what you were asking him about with especially young men who are asking, like, what is my life for?
Yeah.
Like, what am I living for? Because great, life is getting more efficient, but toward what end? And I think how you answer that question, like AI, and I think digital technology as a whole is prompting this question, but AI is going to just be like, hold my beer to all of it, right? It's going to force us to ask the question, what is my telos? How and how we view AI is going to say a lot about the functional telos that we are living in terms of like the purpose of our life, and whether that is one that can transcend AI and is going to be, or is it threatened by AI? Right?
How could it be threatened by AI? Flesh that out more.
I mean, I think it'd be threatened by AI in the same way social media has threatened users and all of society in the unraveling that it is, like the polarization that happens. Social media is a significant threat in that it greases the wheels toward dehumanization of other people through disembodiment and outrage porn and everything else. So I just don't think, Tristan Harris has said that social media is our trial run for AI because algorithms are AI. They're just really mild and they're built differently, right? But it functions in a very similar way in terms of curating our experience of the online world. AI is going to be one more kind of concentric circle closer to home into our embodied reality by offering to interpret for us, not curate other interpretations of other people, even if it's contextless. AI is going to interpret for us data and meaning, but it's not embodied, so it can't be wise, and it can't be true, good, and beautiful knowledge either. And so if we rely on AI for that, and we get so used to that being easy that it makes it the muscles for wisdom, maturity, and virtue begin to atrophy, then it just makes it even harder to recover those things and have a telos in life that leads us toward greater Christ-likeness.
Yeah. That's good. That's good.
I don't know what about how I feel like this is a conversation that's really difficult to kind of get your arms around, right? And because we're sitting here talking in a way that is principle driven, and so what we haven't talked about is the reality that like our people are using AI already. Like I talk to people on an almost weekly basis at the table because we have a whole lot of software engineers and data scientists people. Like they are very aware that they feel like they are beginning to train their future replacements. And the further down that road we go, the more uncomfortable it's going to be. And it's forcing them to ask the question, like, what is my life for? Like, what do I do with my life if I can't compete or do as well as an AI in my job and my vocation? How do I make meaning and make sense of the world anymore?
Yeah. Well, I think the takeaway I had related to AI from Alan was that it's actually worth this wrestle of On the front end, it's worth the wrestle of wherever I'm at in terms of my use of AI. I need to start asking the question, like, what is this doing to me?
Yeah.
And,
yeah.
And it's worth the pause. I think it's worth the pause wherever you are. It just kind of reminds me of like a moment, I don't remember, it was in the last decade when our phones started having the ability to shrink the video screen. So you could watch a video in the side of your screen and continue to flip, or scroll or whatever. And I remember at first I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. And then one of my buddies, Danny Slavich, who's a pastor down here in South Florida, he posted or tweeted about it. And he's like, this is not good for us. And here we are some years later. I can't remember if you said this or someone else said this, but now Netflix is trying to come up with movies, assuming that you're scrolling on your phone at the same time, maybe even two screens at once. And it's like, well, the stories just got worse then. If that's how they're, if they're assuming you're not paying attention.
Scripts that have they're editing and telling script writers to put in more expositional narrative. In other words, people saying out loud what they're doing on screen because they're assuming you're listening without watching. That's crazy.
That is crazy.
But also, I'm ADD, so part of me is just like, oh, okay, that sounds helpful. But also, maybe that's part of the reason why I'm as ADD as I am.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it's shaped and formed me that way.
So then we're looking at the implications of that for that particular thing, a screen on your phone that lets you watch the movie while you're scrolling on Instagram at the exact same time, watching other reels. So then we kind of ask the question, well, where are we going to be in 5 years with AI if we don't wrestle now? And even as I've been at family ministry here at Spanish River, I can't help but think of the angle for parents. And I really think the way Alan framed things at the beginning of this interview just made me think, gosh, parents, it is worth really considering delaying your children's exposure to AI and definitely delaying their unmitigated access to it as long as possible. Now, in that, sometimes I think it's helpful for parents to expose their children to it in limited ways and show them responsible use. But to give your children AI and let them go to town, gosh, the developmental damage that can do, according to Alan, was just really scary. And so I think you need to be asking the question, what is this doing to me? What is this doing to my children? What could this do to society? So that was, I think it was a good warning from Alan in terms of AI. But then that made me think a little bit more about virtue. I'm really excited for his book to come out because I think it's going to be very helpful. And I think he only at one point in the interview used the word pragmatism. But I think that word has a lot to do with both how we think about AI and if we're willing to live a virtuous life. He talked about pragmatism leading us away from an embodied experience in a community. Hey, I can use AI and figure this out on my own, or as you've said in the past, I can call somebody and set up an appointment to learn from them how they've done this thing that I've got a question about. But I think pragmatism has really damaged our society, especially when it comes to spirituality. And you've written about this in the book. But when I was talking with people while church planning and I was sharing the gospel with them, I got the sense a lot that what the question they were asking was, will this spirituality work for me? And I want a spirituality that serves me as I am. I want a system of morality that already fits into what I believe. It's pragmatism, right? It works for me. And now what we're seeing, it's super interesting and actually very hopeful, is that a lot of younger people have tried that and realize, I don't want something that works for me. I want to work for something greater than myself. I want to live a life of virtue. And as even I had a conversation this morning with a young man who is asking these questions and searching for meaning and searching, what does it look like for me to live for something bigger and then point people to something bigger even as he thinks about, as he's considering Christianity. And I think if we're, anything that's worth living for is bigger than us, and it won't necessarily work for us. It will not be practical. One of my friends said, living for the kingdom of God is not practical at all. It's incredibly costly.
Yeah.
But in the same sense, living a virtuous life for Christ as a kingdom citizen actually calls us to give our lives away to something greater. And we find that, hey, guess what? We were actually made to be in a story rather than to be the center of the story. And so that's why I think Alan's book is really going to be helpful, as he's going to spell out, as he said, what does this mean for tomorrow when I wake up and get out of bed and I'm confronted with these options of AI or social media? How do I live a life that's meaningful? How do I live a life of virtue?
Yeah, like maybe another way of saying that is just, if you and your self-actualization are the telos of life,
Boom.
Then any means toward that end become permissible.
Yeah.
They become options.
Yeah.
And if that is the case, then AI seems like it's going to be really good and helpful, but we're not considering the formative impact because we are an insufficient and incredibly small ultimate purpose to pursue. And it's gonna leave us really hollow. And we're already feeling that even before AI becomes, again, assuming it's even possible to build an AGI or an ASI, even on this early on, it's leaving people hollow. Like, we thought we had a mental health crisis before with social media. Holy crap! Yeah,
Brad, what a hopeful way to end this episode.
Well, I mean, no. Here is the hopeful. I know that sounds bad, but also, if we and Alan Noble and others are right that AI is going to catalyze a winnowing of our anthropology, and it's going to sort out and show and demonstrate what anthropologies are actually flourish us versus what won't. Then in the short term, yeah, I'm really pessimistic. But in the long term, I mean, there is no other way of viewing our means or our telos outside of Christianity that can provide what we need to flourish as human beings. Like, there's just no other option. And the church, as a steward of those ordinary means of grace that are going to, it's very much okay, exile is really discouraging, but exile is also preparation for return and renewal.
Boom, dude. This is exactly what I was thinking. In past episodes of the podcast, we've talked about how we should be ready for those who are experiencing the fallout of the sexual revolution, to return to the church, and we offer a way of help and healing. And we've also talked about those who experience the fallout of secularism. And I think now that's actually what we're seeing, a lot of these people return. And in a similar way, I do wonder if we dive headfirst into AI and we experience the natural consequences of living a disembodied life, if we can expect that sometime in the future, we can help those who experience the fallout of being absorbed into AI, and help them find pathways back to virtuous living for the kingdom of God.
Yeah, that's the separation that Alan was talking about, right? I mean, you see, that's where C.S. Lewis's quote, I think, is so powerful, where he says, there are ultimately two kinds of people in the world: those who say to God, "Thy will be done," and those to whom God says, "Thy will be done."
Wow.
And I think the separation is going to just make it more and more clear, because we're going to start to see the impact of those two different postures. And one of those is going to lead to flourishing, and the other one's going to lead to greater shallowness, hollowness, emptiness, and loneliness. And I don't like that for neighbors or Christians who uncritically engage in this either. But it feels, I don't know. I just have this sense that God's still in it, in all of it.
Yeah,
he's not gonna abandon his church or his people to a digital God, according to Joe Rogan.
Yeah. Well, the place of exile shifts, but God remains the same and calls us home.
Preach.
Yeah.
Amen, man.
Brad, good episode. To our listeners, we'll be back in 2 weeks, and we're excited to be back on this journey with you.
Amen. We'll see you then.
Bye-bye. Thank you for listening. If you found this episode helpful, text it to a friend. Please take a minute and rate this podcast. Leaving a review helps other people find us and connect. You can send us questions or feedback by emailing us at posteverythingpod@gmail.com. Thank you.